The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
Top of the day, I'm Joe Doolittle.
And I'm Kate Dudding.
And this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit.
And we're storytellers. And we are glad you're here because we want to invite you to an engaging conversation on the use of story in all sorts of walks of life. And
entertainment, healing, presentations,
all sorts of communication, and kind of it's the ultimate engagement vehicle, I think, in a way. Particularly if you think about how conversation flows between big people and little people, between people of the same age, and it's often how we transfer beliefs, rituals,
knowledge,
our culture, all of that stuff. And we've been doing some interesting things in storytelling. We've had a big bash at Proctor's.
I'm laughing because it hasn't happened yet as of the taping day, but it will have happened by the time you see this.
Well, just kind of free associate.
Oh, okay.
Tell me a story about Telebration, Kate.
It had 9 different tellers, and one story was told by 2 of them together.
Wow.
Claire Nolan and Eileen Egan Mack.
They told a story like in tandem?
In tandem, yes.
Neat.
And it was, who was stronger, the sun or the wind?
The sun or the wind.
And of course, one was the sun and one was the wind.
So we had a little physics lesson, did we, with that story?
Maybe.
Or earth science at least.
Yes. Then there were some personal stories. The topic was sparks.
Sparks.
And sparks can ignite new ideas, can start forest fires. I don't think we had any stories like that. But I created a new story for this, which was an event that sparked my storytelling career.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Do you want to just run that quickly? No. Oh. Just checking.
Oh, well, it's already over, so it's not that I'm giving it away. No.
One of the things we'd like you to know is that the Telebration is a performance that's held in about 400 places around the U.S. and some foreign countries on the same weekend, and it's in celebration of story. And our particular Story Guild, Story Circle, uses the proceeds to fund community storytelling events.
And this is our 23rd annual Telebration, and we funded over 100 different storytelling events in our community.
So the commercial message from this, if you're thinking about maybe starting a story circle or storytelling performance in your school or community and want some help, you ought to email us, contact us through our website, and submit a application for the competition that we award these grants to, because that could be a good opportunity for everybody. How about that?
Yes, indeed. What have you done with storytelling?
Well, I have a very relaxed program I call First Tuesdays at Arthur's Cafe in the Schenectady's Historic Stockade, and it's as you know, it's a little open, so people can come and play music and sing and read poetry and read stories. And this past week, I had a friend show up and say, I have a story I wrote a while ago, and it's a long story, so I'm going to need more than 20 minutes.
Wow.
Oh. And I said to myself, I said, self, help me here, because I really like this lady, and she's talented, but a long story can just kind of, it can put everybody to sleep, or worse, they can decide to go home. So I said to her, well, what's your story about? And she said, I wrote it when I was just out of college, and I was working on the Dukakis campaign.
Wow.
I said, you worked on the Dukakis campaign? He was the Democratic candidate that was a candidate for the presidency because Gary Hart had gotten bumped out for having the bimbo sit in his lap. Do you remember the famous picture that just got outed as a cheap political hack move? Well, the short of this story is that she read her story of working first on the primary, then on the campaign, and then returning to a normal life. And one of the techniques that she used that was masterful is where she had a break in that sequence. She would read something from the journal she kept for that period of time. So she went from the story she'd written to first person, and then she transitioned into the next story. And I share that because it's a technique I'd never really heard it done before, and it was done really well, and it worked. Because you kind of had the sequence and the continuing effect of the story. So I share that with an idea that if you have any ideas of coming out with something that's a little bit out of the ordinary, show up at Arthur's on the first Tuesday of the month. We're not going to be meeting in December, but that first Tuesday in January.
The second?
The second. We have a feature teller who will be Janine Laverty, one of the grand storytellers we have here, a very helpful storytelling coach as well. And you can bring you could even bring your long story if you want to, but and we already have somebody who comes and plays the banjo, so if you want to play with them. But it's a genuinely good gathering, and we have coffee and dessert, and it's just a fine time.
And does Janine have a topic for it?
I think it's Stories of the Winter Wind, since it's January.
Appropriate.
At any rate, I tell that story because we all learn from other storytellers and authors about how to present stories and ideas. And this use of the primary voice from her journal was just very well done.
Yeah, and it could also be done with historical stories like I do, because often there are, if you're lucky, there are journals. When I did a story on Clara Barton, there was so much information. Sometimes I can find like 3 sentences.
Yeah.
She wrote, I think, 3 books or something like that. So it was like, oh, that's a little much. But I think I might have used that, but not really as dramatically as I could, just because this was what I had found. But
speaking of kind of storytellers that we've known and cared about, I think we have a guest that qualifies on those 2 things. I think Betty Cassidy is with us today, all the way from Saratoga, and she's been telling stories. I think she told stories when she was, a professor at Adirondack Community College.
Oh.
I think before she became a real storyteller, she was a real storyteller as a college professor. But I'm not sure about that. But welcome.
Thank you.
Betty Cassidy, it's nice to have you here.
Thank you.
We all know each other, but you're going to love meeting Betty.
Okay.
and
Now, were you really a storyteller before you were a storyteller? Did you use storytelling?
I think I was a storyteller from the time I was about 5 years old.
Since she could talk. There you go.
Okay, but were these stories you were telling about your siblings, or?
Just anything that happened.
Oh.
My mother would always say, now, is that a real story? So, and I became a storyteller as a result of learning to use it in the classroom. And I was teaching a course in public speaking and teaching how you do a persuasive speech had them realize that you could tell a story along with giving a lot of statistics or without a lot of statistics and factual stuff. The story might do the word as far as persuading, because we have stories thrown at us all day on advertising and so forth.
Right.
So that's then when I figured storytelling is great fun. I like it, and I'm learning from it, and it's exciting. And I also met a whole group of people I never would have met. One of my daughters did ask me once, "Is that some kind of a cult?"
That's some kind of a cult. Are we a storytelling cult?
Underground cult.
I said yes, because that was 10, 15 years ago when you didn't hear much about storytelling around here.
I think cult qualifies. I gotta go check up on the exact definition, but I think that kind
In a
of
benign
clustered to- in a
kind
benign
of
way.
Well, it was the thought of meeting new people.
Yeah.
But so that's, and then I got involved somewhere along the way for that classroom. Janine Laverty, whom you mentioned before, was doing a program at the Saratoga Library on storytelling, and so I went to that.
A 4-week session.
A 4-week session, and it was free, and I was free to go at the time to go, and I went to that, and from then on I was hooked.
Wow.
So that was.
Well, I took that same class with her. I think it was in 96 or 97. Yes.
Yes, and then after that she had several workshops. Some of them I remember you at, and the more you got involved a little bit, you were involved a little bit more and a little bit more. So
You got sucked right into the cult.
Sucked right. And now you're part of the steering group for that open mic. I mentioned the one that I run in Schenectady, but at Cafe Lena too, haven't you?
no, that's mostly Margaret and Janine and Christy.
All right, I thought you were.
I've helped out once in a while, but
okay.
I go a lot.
I go. Yeah, I go
Yes.
too. I think it's a great place
Yes.
to just be. And,
Yes, and
that's where the cult meets in Saratoga. At Cafe Lena.
The 4th Tuesday of the month. Get there early, order your food and drink.
Right, and it's a great place to listen to stories or music, and it's just a nice place to be.
And the renovation has made it even better, more comfortable, better sound. I like to think she had a really nice facelift.
That's a good way of describing it.
Not. I went to my 50th high school reunion, and clearly there was one of us who had a facelift that was a little over-aggressive.
Over-aggressive? Oh.
Yes, it was like, why does she? Oh.
I see.
Anyways, I digress.
We digress,
quite a
and
little.
the only-
Cafe Lena's isn't like that at all.
And she does have a facelift, and it lifted it all the way up because it has an elevator now.
Yes,
So there you go.
that's true.
In case you need an elevator. Betty, when all this was going on in terms of your teaching and taking Janine's class and stuff, is there a preference for the kind of story you really like to tell? I mean, I've heard you tell stories about your family and growing up. I've heard you tell stories about important people.
And then there's that $100 bill story,
$100
which is folklore, I guess.
It's hard to answer, because when I get an idea or see something, I want to tell a story on that.
Right.
But I think many of the ones, the factual ones, dealing with something historical, I think most of the ones I've chosen is because they remind me of something that's going on today. That if there's some kind of a problem somewhere, like racism or anything else, it's that happened 50 or 100 or 200 years ago. We're looking at it, and the stories relate to what's going on today. For me, anyway, and I hope they do for the audience sometimes.
So when you tell a story that might involve the past, you're really interested because you hear the echo of that story in the present. Kind of.
Yes, there's a story I tell. One of the early ones I told was a story about my grandmother. Well, I didn't care about telling a story about my grandmother as much as except I was teaching a course in women's literature then, and we all got talking about what was life like for these women, and I could tell that story and feel like they got
Yeah,
it
they got
more
it.
than if we just kept reading stuff and talking about the facts.
They worked 72 hours a week on indoor chores and
Yes. Yeah. So if they're factual stories or historical stories, they somehow ring a bell for me anyway. Or sometimes just if I'm go to a new place, I come up with a story because I'm interested in it.
Yeah.
So,
New places will do that. Traveling to some place that's not familiar, and sometimes the echo of the place will ring, and you'll find you've harvested a story that you didn't know you were ever going to have. Yeah, that's happened to me too. Yep.
or I remember being stunned going to Arizona and being around in Page, which is in the northern part.
Right.
And there are no cactus. There's no green. I grew up in Connecticut, and you could always see something green. Even in the wintertime, there are the evergreen trees. And there was like nothing was growing. And I really had a panic attack there. And then I finally learned, and I didn't know why, but that's why. If you look down, you see these little tiny green things to show that this is a habitable place. But yeah, I realized that people growing up there, when they go to Connecticut, they feel oppressed because they can't see the horizon. And the trees I find more comforting than oppressive. So it's something I never thought of before.
All right. No,
That makes sense.
That's true. So the travels, the echoes. Hey, have you got a story you want to share with us today? And because we'd
yes.
love to listen to a story, and then we can talk about it. You know.
all right. Trying to decide which one. All right. Let me do one of these semi-historical ones.
That'd be good.
To start with, I call it learning to read. Okay. Isaac and Sam were walking along this dusty road. They had been walking for hours and hours. This was in the late 1800s. Isaac and Sam were black men. They had been slaves, but the slaves had just been freed. They were freed from this plantation where they had lived their whole lives, and they didn't quite know what to do. They had been told what to do. They had no freedom, but they knew they had to get away and find some help. Isaac was only about 19 years old. Sam, he thinks, was around 40-ish. He never knew what his birthday was. But he had kind of taken Isaac under his wing to help Isaac live through those terrible teenage years when Isaac would try to complain about something. His back was covered with scars. And Sam had helped him out. But as they walked along, he said, "Where are we going? What'll we do?" And Isaac said, "I know if we just keep going. I hear there's a church in the little town nearby in Georgetown. We can find that church. There's someone there that will help us." And they walked and walked and walked, and they got into the town, and they finally asked someone, and they said, "Oh, I think it's down that street, way down the hill there." And they walked down, and they saw this kind of poorly shaped shack building, old wooden building that was being kind of destroyed. But in front there were two sticks held together to make a cross, and they said, "This must be it." And there were people out in the yard around this building, and some of them were just sort of sitting, some of them looked as if they were cooking something under a little fire or walking around. And they said, "Well, what do we do there?" And someone said, "Well, you got to go in there and see Miss Sandy." And they walked up to the front steps and started to go up, and the door opened, and one of the largest, strongest looking women in the world, a black woman, was there saying, "You boys coming in here?" And they said, yes, we'd like to come here. And she said, "I'm Miss Sandy." "Yes, we know. And she said, "You can come here, but you got to do just what I say." And they said, "Okay." She said, "You got to learn to read." They said, "Read? We're not allowed to read." She said, "You're free. You're allowed to read now. You've got to learn." So they went in, And she sat them down. It was one of the pews of this old church. Now, Miss Sandy didn't have any equipment for teaching school. She didn't have pencils or pens or paper or anything else, blackboards. She had pieces of charcoal and flat piece of wood, maybe. And she didn't have any books, but there were Bibles in there. So her technique was she'd pull out some pages from the Bible and pick out maybe a sentence or 3 or 4 words, like Jesus loves me or something you'd find in any Bible. And she had them copy those letters over and over, which sounds kind of strange, but she wanted them to understand that those little marks on the paper translated into words, and the words translated into meanings. They had no real concept of that. So they worked on that for several days, for quite a while. They moved up to learning about the whole alphabet a little bit. And one day, Sam burst out of that place and outside and said, Miss Sandy, look what I can do. And he took a stick and down in the sand and this dried up earth in front of me, he wrote S-A-M. I can write my name. Well, Isaac came along and put his down. He said, my name is twice as long as yours. I must be twice as smart. Well, they stayed, and Miss Sandy worked with them more. She said, you're going to be going soon, and you're going to find a job. And you got to be able to write your name. You got to know where you go when you see the funny thing we call an arrow. You go this way. You may know that now, but I'm sure you know. And you got to also, you can't just say I was a slave. You each have lots of skills. You've been working on those rice farms your whole lives. You know how to grow rice. You know how to take care of animals. You know how to fix things that are broken. You got to tell them everything you can do, so they'll hire you. And she encouraged them, and finally the day came when she said, it's time for you to go. She would kind of have liked to have them stick around because they were kind of good to have there, but she needed space for other people because people kept coming. So they said goodbye and they left. And Miss Sandy kept going with her work for a long, long time. Once in a while she wondered how they were doing, all these people that went off and left from her place, if they did all right. And then one day, a person who was traveling by foot came along and said, I'm looking for a Miss Sandy. He looked in his travel bag and read it again. He said, yep, I got a letter for her. And I'm just going through this town. And I thought this is where they said I'd find her. And they showed him in to see Miss Sandy. And he said, I got a letter for you. He said, a letter? I never had a letter. And she opened it up, opened the top of the envelope, pulled out, it was a folded up piece of paper, looked like it might have been ripped from a book or a notebook or something. And she unfolded it, and there were 2 $1 bills. And on that paper, it said, thank you, Isaac and Sam. Well, she was so thrilled. And everyone said, well, they didn't tell where they are or how they're doing. And she said, just look at this. We know how they're doing. In these days, sometimes you have to work a whole week to make $1. And you have to work hard. And they've got enough money to send us $2. They have really learned to read. That's Miss Sally's. So,
Wonderful.
yeah, I like that kind of story.
Now, where did you harvest that story?
I'm trying to remember because I think it was part of I was doing some other long involved story about something about that area because I traveled somewhere in that area, and I was also trying to, that must have been while I was still teaching full time because I was also telling my students and my own kids the value of reading and that you would be sorry if you didn't know how to read well and so on.
Now, you mentioned, was that like South Carolina then?
Yeah, I didn't mention, I forgot the exact dates. Yeah.
well, I figured with the rice that it would be South
Yeah,
Carolina
yeah.
or Georgia.
Oh,
Yeah.
Good one there, Joe.
Yeah, and Georgetown is there is a Georgetown, South
Yes,
Carolina.
yes,
I
yeah.
picked up that much.
Yeah, I was going to expand on that, but I wasn't quite sure I was right.
And boy, that is a powerful story in so many ways. You know, you've introduced the idea of what happens after you're a slave. You know, how do you behave free?
How do you change your whole mindset?
Right.
I think I read some things about that being
Yeah.
such a problem. So
We're black. We don't read. That was
They
one of
don't
the
know.
lines.
Well,
Yeah.
We can't. We're not
You can't.
allowed. It's-
Yeah.
And Miss Sandy now, how she was, she A, knew how to read, and B, was determined to help her people.
That's where that part of that story came from. I just remembered because there was another part of it about a Miss Sandy who cheated and taught herself to read because she worked in
Oh,
the plantation house, taking care of the little children. At one point, I had that as part of the
When
story.
they were having their lesson.
Their lesson,
Yeah, okay, I remember.
she could learn to read. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that was that. There were different parts to that, as I
Yeah.
remember. It's amazing how you forget some of these when you once you accumulate a bunch of stories.
Oh, yeah. They're
Well,
just,
and just the nature of the power and the influence of literacy, and how many of those slaves were forbidden to learn, or you were forbidden to teach them if you were the master.
That's why they sang.
One of the stories that I like to tell is about Moses Viney, who was an escaped slave who became the assistant to Eliphalet Nott, the president of the Union. And his mother was a house slave, and for the first 7 or 8 years, he was in the plantation house with the master's son. And the master's son got schooled, so Moses got schooled. And it made all the difference in terms of how he was able to acculturate himself once he ran away. And we often forget how that basic issue of literacy makes so much difference in the way people conduct their lives. And you just introduced that really perfectly in a way that dialogue between we don't read. That was really fun.
a story that I want to develop soon takes it into this century. No. You're Moses Viney. You were in the 1800s.
Yeah,
takes
right.
us into the 1900s. Virginia really dragged its heels in integrating schools. And there was one county in Virginia, Prince Edward County, that instead of integrating their schools, they closed them down for 5 years. This is absolutely true. And then when they were, so there were some free schools that people tried to set up, and the wealthy white students, well, there were white private schools that started up,
Yeah.
but the poor whites and the blacks had nowhere to go. And when the schools started up 5 years later, well, if you had been going to enter first grade, you were now the size of a fifth grader.
Yeah.
So a lot of them never went back. To show the depth of it, there was a woman who works in the county office there, and she says, it breaks my heart, but people come in and they want me to help them fill out a form because they never learn to read.
Yeah.
Now, just to show you, quantify the damage,
Yeah.
and there are oral histories I've seen. I've gotten that far, so I haven't tried to get a hold of these oral histories. But in 50 years after the closing of the schools, the Prince Edward County High School offered honorary degrees to anyone who had been affected by the closure. For 2 years they did it. 600 people showed up to get honoraries. These people were, if it was first grade when they were, 50 years, so they were a minimum of 55 years old, and they wanted to get a high school diploma. think of, their lives were totally, that's chopped off, their possibilities.
And so the conversation we're having about this Betty's story and Kate's developing story is kind of the echo again of something that has not gone away completely, because we still have the disparity in the way kids score on reading tests and how that affects lives today. And the story makes it more vivid for us. So if we're telling the story to a congressperson, then it resonates because they're considering allocating resources to fix something. And it's important that we keep our awareness about us, and sometimes a story is a good satchel for carrying those meanings.
I like to say I'm putting a face on history. That the statistics don't grab me. The face and the oral histories. Another story I have about the civil rights movement was a woman who integrated a high school prior to the year before Little Rock. And she said, "We are all one race, the human race. The complexions of our skin may differ, but we're all members of one race." Now her family had sued to try to integrate the schools, and they won the suit. And she only stayed for 1 year, and then they moved to California because they didn't feel safe. Yeah. So
There are dozens of ways that stories from the past connect.
Yeah.
I mean, almost every topic. People have stories on immigration, and
Right.
they're certainly applying today.
right. Yes.
And schools, charter schools, and all this kind of thing. They're there all the time.
All the time. We're going to come back to this conversation, but I'd like Kate to kind of take us through what's happening in the storytelling community coming up in
December.
In December, yeah.
Okay. First, I just want to mention that we have 3 monthly series that are taking December off. The first Tuesday's Tales and Stuff at Arthur's at the Stockade in Schenectady. The Shawnee Evenings at the Irish American Heritage Museum in Albany. And Storytelling Open Mic at Cafe Lena. As I said earlier, that's on the 4th Tuesday of every month. And the 4th Tuesday is December 25th. So
Now that isn't working.
that doesn't
That's
really work out
a
too
story in and of itself, right
Yes,
there. Okay.
Yes. So, but the Interfaith Story Circle is going to have their December meeting on Wednesday, December 12th. Stories of Living in Darkness. And Karen Pillsworth, our friend, storytelling laureate of Kingston, New York, is going to be their featured teller. That will be at the Hubbard Interfaith Sanctuary on Madison Avenue in Albany on the St. Rose campus. Free and open to the public, and you're welcome to come and listen or share. And they don't want everybody to be a professional storyteller. They want people to share stories of, and not necessarily religious stories. But Gert Johnson started the Interfaith Story Circle over 25 years ago under the premise that the more people of faith share their stories, the more they realize how much they have in common. So, then something new, but not new, is the monthly meeting of Story Circle of the Capital District. In December, for 13 years, we've been having, I guess, an exercise, could call it. Same story, different voice. We take a folk tale, and people develop their own version of it. This year it's Beauty and the Beast. We're doing it a little more formally, that there will be 4 tellers. Linda McKinney, Nancy Marie Payne, Claire Nolan, and myself. And then 4 facilitators who will interrogate isn't quite the right word, is it?
Provide commentary.
Provide commentary, thank you. Joe is going to be one of those. Asking the tellers, well, why did you pick that approach? Or why did you make that person the main voice? Because I haven't decided what my approach is going to be. When I'm going to set it, if I'm going to set it at a particular time. Who's going to be the main character. I've heard this done at a national conference, and I can remember 3 of the versions. One was Beast was telling the story, first person. And at the very end, just as the last petal has fallen off the rose and he can scarcely talk, from the back, a woman's voice goes, "Beast, I'm here." So it wasn't quite a person, but it was. Okay, so there was that. And contrast to that, a woman said, "Welcome to our 25th anniversary party. I'm so glad you could all come. And it reminds me of when we first met." Okay, so that was another approach. And she had their kingdom by the sea, because she lives on Martha's Vineyard. Okay. And then a third one, and this was Milbury Birch, and she was substituting for somebody, so she had like 2.5 days to prepare. She had teenage daughters then, and she had the Beast as anorexia. So,
wow.
And I think the 4th one was a traditional type of version from Africa, even though this was, as far as my research shows thus far, it was written by a French woman in the late 1600s. So it was originally a literary story.
Now, that's the topic and what happens. What's the time, place, and those kinds of things for this gathering?
Thank you. The Delaware
I got so involved
branch,
in the stories, I was
going to say, well, we haven't decided where we're going to. You mean the event, right? At the Delaware branch of the Albany Public Library, that's on 331 Delaware Avenue, and bring a potluck dessert to share.
Ooh.
And it's free. You don't have to just show up. We're not
show up with something sweet to
Yes.
eat.
Yes. So it should be fun to hear the stories, fun to hear why people chose to do things. Maybe beauty was my grandmother. I don't know. Who knows? I don't know where I'm going to go with this. The original version had 6 sons and 6 daughters. Beauty was the youngest. The versions I've heard now, it's just the 3 daughters that we've cast aside the irrelevant siblings. Okay, on to the next event. On December 31st, Margaret French and I are going to be doing 2 programs on the kindness of strangers at 6 and 8 p.m. as part of First Night Saratoga.
Oh, good for you.
And we'll be at the Empire State College at 2 Union Avenue in room 103 at 6 and 8. And these are stories for teens and adults.
Wonderful that you're going to be part of that. That's great.
Yes, last year I told stories with Siri, Allison, and Christy Keegan.
Ooh, good. Well, you do keep yourself in good company. I will say.
Try to do that, and then this is into January, but we won't have another on January 2nd. That's almost December. As was mentioned earlier, Janine Laverty will be the featured performer at First Tuesday's Tales and Stuff at Arthur's in the Stockade section of Schenectady. Stories of the Winter Wind. And we had a little taste of that this morning when there was some snow here and there.
I woke up and saw snow covering my bushes, and I said, "Oh my!"
But not the roads. So it was just a little taste. And then we always like to remind you of our main series at Proctor's, Word Plays. We still have 3 more coming up in January, February, and April, starting over Inside Out and Shenanigans. Shenanigans, that's 6 days after April Fool's Day. And
Perfect.
And less than a month after St. Patrick's Day. So, and if you need a story, you can find it on demand. Go to Story Circle at Proctor's and click on YouTube, and you'll find over 200 stories.
And I'm going to make a plug for that because I just used it in a program I'm doing with the Schenectady County Historical Society. And I got an email saying, we're trying to do this thing on an exhibit on growing up in Schenectady. And so I was very flattered, and I said, I'll put out the word, and we talked a little bit about the program. It'll be an hour long on the 19th of January. And I said, if you want to try out what storytelling is like, please go to and you can kind of preview some of the tellers and some of the material. And in her follow-up email, she had done that, and she was even more excited about things. So it's a great resource. And if you want to try us out, there it is, live, just like we have today with Betty.
Now, most of our meetings of the Stories of the Capital District are for people to tell stories that are generally works in progress. And they could be, I've got this idea, and here's I don't know if this is going to work, so I need to try it out on you, and I'd like your feedback. And other people I haven't told this in a long time, I just want to tell it to human faces. And I only want to hear what you like about it, So the teller is in control of how much or how little feedback they get, and can specifically control it. I'm working on differentiating the voices of the mother and the daughter, for instance. Did that work? So we know a story. It's like a newborn baby. And, when they come through the birth canal, my son's head was a little...
I've known stories like that.
Yeah, right. And so I didn't need anyone to point that out to me. I knew that, but... what lovely eyes. Yeah, that's what I wanted to hear at that stage.
Well, the days of our meetings, like the one in December, in January and thereafter, are on our website, which is storycircle@proctors.org.
And then click on Story Circle, or you can go story-circle.org. They're two websites, but they're kind of intertwined.
Production and a resource kind of role. But right. the invitation's there for you to come to a Story Circle meeting and just listen, try something out, any of the open mics that we sponsor, or the performances. We'd like to have new voices in our storytelling, so welcome. Speaking of kind of a good voice, we're back to Betty.
We're back to Betty.
And we're back to Betty. And I'd like another story. Wouldn't you like another story?
Yes, please.
Okay. Before I start, though, I just want to tell you all the values of storytelling you're talking about. I've read about one recently that I'm telling a lot of people about, that it's good for your brain. Because
really?
It's one of the only times, probably, that it's good for your brain as a listener and a teller. It's one of the only times probably you don't have a television screen, you don't have music, really? You don't have anything ahead to look at, slides or anything. It's just a voice, and your brain is accepting that brain is working in certain ways that are good for it and will keep you youthful and keep it going forever. So,
and it has been shown that your brain activity there's much more brain activity when you're listening to a story than when you're watching a movie.
Because always.
The movie has, all the pictures have been made. But when you're listening to a voice...
Because you're creating your own with it and using it. Yes, so it's for both telling and listening.
Once there was an old barn.
Yeah.
Well, I always think of the old barn that used to be on Grooms Road that had the slate roof with the 1891 in the slate. And the red was, fading and all that. But you might have been thinking of a round stone barn like that in the
Chatham.
Shakers. Yeah. So we're making our pictures all the time, and I learned that if some physical aspect is important, do it at the beginning, right at the beginning. If she has to have blonde hair, say it at the beginning, because otherwise people have made a picture, and when you get to when it's important, it's blonde hair. It's like, oh, I thought she was a brunette, and so people have stopped listening. They're kind of erasing the picture that they made. They're reforming it, and the next minute they didn't hear a single thing of what she said. Anyways, I digress.
But anyway, it is nice to be able to say it's not it's all those other good things, but it's also good for your
I
health.
think it's addictive,
Yeah.
but it doesn't. You don't gain weight.
It's a good addiction.
It's a good addiction.
It's dietetic. That's good. We like that best. But, Betty.
All right. Kate said something about this story at the beginning, mentioned the title of this story at the beginning, so I think I will tell the story of the $100 bill. It's from a story written by a storyteller called Fran Stallings.
Yes.
Quite some time ago, and I saw it in a magazine once, and I don't know why, but I just love this story. Okay. Mr. McCabe owned one of the largest farms, ranches in the Southwest. He was doing very, very well. He was making a lot of money. He was hiring a lot of people. He was a good man who helped the community out. His only problem was finding enough workers, because ranch hands would show up and they might stay a week and they might stay a month and work, and then they'd go on because they wanted to go somewhere else. They wanted to go to California or go north or take off. They'd get on their horses and ride away, and he'd have to find someone else, or else he'd hire someone who stayed who wasn't any good. So that was his problem, and he kept trying to figure out what to do. And one day there was a knock on his door, and there was this man who said, my name's Charlie, and I hear you're looking for helpers. And he said, well, yes, I am, Charlie, but come on in and let's talk about that. Well, he asked Charlie a lot of questions, and Charlie seemed to know how to answer them all, and he seemed okay, and he looked fine. And so Mr. McCabe said, well, he wasn't naive, though, he liked this guy, but he'd only met him. He said, Charlie, let's you and I work out a deal. I'll hire you for like a month. So this is early in the month. I'll hire you till the end of the month, and if I like you, we'll keep you here. And if you like me, you can stay here, or you're free to go. Well, that month was just like heaven for Mr. McCabe, because Charlie turned out to be the greatest worker ever. He knew how to do everything. He knew how to take care of the animals. He knew how to fix the fences when they were down. He knew how to repair any of the equipment that was there. And most of all, he knew how to get along with the other workers. And they liked working with him. And they accomplished more when Charlie was around and trying to help them out. So at the end of the month, Mr. McCabe said, Charlie, you are hired. I hope you stay forever and ever. And they worked out some kind of a deal. Charlie loved being there. It was fine. Everything was going well. But then they had a year with a drought, and everything was drying up. And there was no hope that it was going to end very soon. So Mr. McCabe called Charlie in and said, we got to sell this cattle soon. I know we usually wait till they're older and heavier and everything else, but we can't even feed them anymore. I want you to take some men with you and take that herd of cattle into town and sell them at the auction. You won't get much money for them, but see what you can do. I know it's a hard job, but I know you can do it, Charlie. Charlie said, fine, you can do it. And he got 3 of his best workers. They all got on their horses, and they got the cattle out, and they spent 2 days getting this herd of cattle from the ranch down to the auctioneers. And it was very tiresome. They slept out in their sleeping bags the first night and made sure none of the cattle ran away or anything happened to them. And by the end of the second day, when Charlie had made the deal to sell these things, they were all ready to just do something fun. And they went. They went to Miss Martha's house. It was like a boarding house, sort of, but she had a little bar in there, and she had rooms for rent, and all of this stuff, and they had a wonderful time. They had wonderful meal. They had dancing. Some girls showed up. So they had dancing and music and singing and lots and lots and lots of beer. So the next morning, there was Miss Martha staring in at this room. Charlie came by and said, "Charlie, look at that. That mirror's broken. That chair, the leg is off it, I think, now. And this place stinks. Somebody must have spilled every drop of their beer all over the place. And I got to do a lot of cleaning up." Charlie said, "Oh, I know, I'm sorry, but the guys had worked so hard, and they did get a little out of hand. I'll see that doesn't happen again." And he reached in his pocket and he said, but here, maybe this will help you. And he handed her $100 bill. And she said, "Oh, Charlie, that will save me. I haven't had much business with this drought. Thank you so much." Charlie said, "You're welcome," and he took the men and they left and went home. Miss Martha ran next door to the grocery store. It was like the general store, but that's where she ordered all her groceries. And she gave the man there that $100 bill because she owed him so much. She had to order and get food and things she needed and charge him, and she didn't like doing that, so she gave him the $100 bill, and he didn't keep it for long because he took it right down the street to the undertaker. And he said, "Mr. Parsons, last summer when my uncle died, you gave him the best funeral I've ever seen. You did everything you needed, and we didn't have enough money to pay you, so I'm paying you now." And he gave him the $100 bill. Well, it went one more place. It went down to the livery stable where the owner there took care of the animals that Mr. Parsons had and everything else, and he got the $100 bill because they were behind in that. And guess where he took it? He took it to Mr. McCabe. He had bought all his food for his horses from Mr. McCabe, from his big ranch. So Charlie and the boys got home. Everybody was happy. Mr. McCabe was thrilled. He said, "Charlie, I don't know how you did it. You got a better price than I ever would have expected." "Oh, I just love having you work here, Charlie, but I got one big favor now to ask of you. It's supposed to finally rain, and maybe thunder and lightning, and out there in the back pasture we got all those new little foals, those little horses, and I'm afraid some of them might get nervous with us. I'd like to have somebody out there tonight to make sure they're all right. Would you mind spending the night out there?" "Well, of course not," said Charlie. And he got ready. He took his blanket, he rolled up to sleeping outside like that, and he got some food and everything else, and he rode his horse out there, tied up the horse, got a fire started, putting his stew in there, stew in the pan pot so he could heat it up. And then he sat down. It was just about dusk by now, and he's looking around, and it's nice. The sun was just setting. It was a beautiful time, and the horses seemed calm, and there was no lightning or thunder again. And Charlie's sitting there, and all of a sudden he starts to smile and kind of laugh. And he reached in his pocket. And you see, Mr. McCabe had given him a $100 bill for the hard work he did with getting those horses there. Charlie pulled that out of his pocket. And you know what he did? He put that right in the fire. And he sat there and watched the black pieces of charred money were raised up and blown away. And Charlie kept smiling. And he said, "Finally, that bill went a long way today, and nobody even noticed it was counterfeit."
That is such a lovely story with such a tricky ending.
Yeah, well, and I got to the end and I thought, oh my God, I forgot to tell him that Miss McCabe gave him the money. So I had to.
I know, and I'm going, let's see how she gets out of this. It's very smooth, very smooth. The panic didn't show at all.
Yeah.
The sweat not on your face. Yeah, that's what.
Charlie burned it up.
Charlie burned it up. And to me, it's like there's something, a lesson in economics about that, but
I haven't figured out what it is.
Quite.
Everyone felt good.
Everyone was their financial status was improved by this this fake piece of money. Don't tell the politicians this.
It's kind of a fun one to tell.
Where did you find that one?
I found that in
I think Storytelling Magazine.
Storytelling Magazine. In fact, Janine Laverty had a bunch of old ones she was giving away one time. It says, and I took a bunch of them and started reading them. And that was the story.
Yeah, she's out in Oklahoma.
Yeah. I think I called her, wrote a letter asking if it was already told the story, and I said yes. So it was fine.
And the way there's a classic thing to the traveling something or other, the gift exchange, if you will, and to have it come back and get burned, and then to have it not be valuable at all. That's a love. I mean, that's a wrinkle. That's a wrinkle in it.
I guess Charlie ended up with no better than he started.
Right.
But everyone else
owed
less.
Charlie won the whole game. Charlie and the boys had their party.
Okay.
And didn't really have to fix that mirror, you know what I'm saying? They hoodwinked the saloon lady.
You're right. Everyone got something.
Yeah.
It was
a conniver is a conniver. Think about it that way. I'm reminded of this. I've never put this story together, but we were in Arizona, down south of Tucson, in a little place called Tupac, Arizona. And we'd gone into this fancy restaurant and realized that we couldn't really afford it. And there were 6 of us. So I actually, when we decided to leave the restaurant, Kay was in the ladies' room. My wife was in the ladies' room. And she comes out and we're not there. And she's figured out what's doing. So we're walking down the street of this little dusty town, away from the fancy country club. And there's a little cafe. And we peek in, and up over the cash register is a sign. And this was about 2 years after the financial meltdown. And it says, due to financial circumstances, the light at the end of the tunnel has been turned off. And we started to giggle, and the owner came out and said, well, come right in. We're having a twofer special. What's a twofer special? Says, well, you buy 1 bottle of wine, you get another for free.
Oh.
And there were 6 of us. But I'll never. And I used that line. Due to the financial circumstances, the light at the end of the tunnel. And that was my only real Western story. So.
The light at the end of the tunnel might be an oncoming train.
Well, then there's the people that cry in Manhattan. Because the light at the end of the tunnel is New Jersey.
Oh.
No, I'm sorry. I mean, offend anybody out there from New Jersey.
Thank you for listening. We've got to go. Bye.
Thanks so much. Much good cheer. Thank you, Betty.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again,